Alrighty, let's keep on with our investigation of love and other demons, Garcia Marquez. We've talked a bit about this central issue of what goes wrong with Sierva Maria and whether we can tell what she died of. And we looked, as you remember, at the beginning supposedly factual statement by Garcia Marquez dated 1994 about his experience in 1948. Whenever you get an author's comment like that at the beginning, you have to say, well, it's also a constructed piece. I don't think we can say it's absolutely factual. We can imagine that maybe this happened. But he's setting us up with this question of the fate of the character. Because as well, she was bit by a dog, but then we see what the fictional saint's life tells us about her, that she was considered to be possessed, and so forth. We've already done that, so you'll remember about that. What I want to do for the beginning here is to look at a few more threads that go through the novel, and then look at some pictures. And the pictures will be focusing on Mary Magdalene, whom I believe is a kind of model for this character. Some of the attributes of Mary Magdalene and this character, her torrent of streaming hair and so forth, are significant, I think. I'm going to make that argument for you. But first, is there someplace that you all want to go with this? Is there some issue here that concerns you, some passage you liked particularly? Please go ahead and direct us to that if you like. Lexi, you were talking about the dream last time and the grapes. Shall we? That's one thread that I think is interesting, this recurring image in the dream. Maybe we'll start there. I want to look at this usual issue that we're looking at, it seems like, throughout, and that's the issue of syncretism and transculturation. It's addressed very specifically a number of times by Garcia Marquez. He seems to want to argue for the same kind of cultural process that we've seen that we've seen Fuentes argue for in The Buried Mirror, and that we've seen Galeano treat in a number of his vignettes as well. And what we know is it's the reality of Latin American history, that various wildly different cultures mixed in ways that they didn't always in North America under Protestant regimes, though sometimes we see that happening in our own culture too, and more now, but as a colonial matter, not so much. So I want to look at that syncretism issue, but let's look at the recurring dream here. Let's look at page 111. I'm not sure if that's the first place it comes up. I believe that's where it is. No, Lexi, do you have those pages handy now? I don't have it. We can start with the back and go forward too. We know that it is in the very last paragraph of the, I'm sorry, yeah, I don't have those pages right handy. I thought I did, but I can't see them. Let's look at the very final image. We'll find it. Oh yeah, now I've got the pages. Thank you. They're written in the margin of my book. That's great. Look at the very end one. 147. That's what Lexi was mentioning the other day as a kind of, let's say, symbolic ending, because we know that always the grapes have grown back on this bunch of grapes that she's eating, but now we see they don't. Look at the final. Sierva Maria never knew what happened to Caetano de Laura, why he never came back with his basket of delicacies from the arcades and his insatiable nights. On the 29th of May, having lost her will to endure anymore, she dreamed again of the window looking out on a snow-covered field from which Caetano de Laura was absent and to which he would never return. In her lap, she held a cluster of golden grapes that grew back as soon as she ate them, but this time she pulled them off, not one by one, but two by two, hardly breathing in her longing to strip the cluster of its last grape. The warder who came in to prepare her for the sixth session of exorcism found her dead of love in her bed, her eyes radiant and her skin like that of a newborn baby. Strands of hair gushed like bubbles as they grew back on her shaved head. Okay, so we see this desire to die, if you want, and somehow this absence of Caetano, the image of her beloved. So we can read this very psychologically, as Freud has taught us to do about dreams, as a kind of a kind of measure, a thermometer of the unconscious. That's the way dreams are considered by psychologists after Freud, anyway. Now, so we can read it that way, and I think that we have to read it that way. I don't see how we cannot. It's a kind of dream of despair. Yeah, Ashley.
Page 75.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. 75. Thank you. Yeah. It's about 3 paragraphs down, the second big fat paragraph, that small, and now tell me the dream, says De Lauda. It was very simple, says the bishop to De Lauda. This is De Lauda's version of it, and this is what's kind of mystical, magical, miraculous that we see. Of course, De Lauda has the same dream that then Sierra Maria will have. That could be some of what would defy belief if this weren't a book about belief. In other words, in a realistic novel, it would be very hard to show 2 characters having an identical dream. I mean, a Scott Fitzgerald couldn't do that, or a Balzac, or even a Flaubert. The great realistic novel doesn't do that. So there, I mean, Ron, partly your question about magical realism, there's stuff here that we kind of permit in ways we would say in a realistic novel. In an Agatha Christie, you wouldn't know that 2 characters, whatever. Anyway, you get my point. Here we have De Lauda's dream. De Lauda had dreamed that Sierra Maria sat at a window overlooking a snow-covered field, eating grapes one by one from a cluster she held in her lap. Each grape she pulled off grew back again on the cluster. In the dream, it was evident the girl had spent many years at that infinite window trying to finish the cluster, and was in no hurry to do so because she knew that in the last grape lay death. The strangest part, concluded De Lauda, is that at the window through which she looked at the field was the one in Salamanca during the winter when it snowed for 3 days and the lambs suffocated in the snow. So he's had this experience of the snow. You could say, well, that oftentimes one's experience leads to dreams, but we know that, of course, Sierra Maria has never had the experience of snow, so it makes it the odder. The bishop was moved. One more sentence or 2. He knew and loved Caetano de Lauda too well to ignore the enigmas of his dreams. He had earned the place he occupied in the diocese and in his affection through his many talents and good character. The bishop closed his eyes to sleep the 3 minutes of his late afternoon siesta, and so forth. Okay, thank you. Then we're going to go to 107. Thank you very much, Ashley. I appreciate that. Okay, here at the top, Caetano was not alarmed. There were tales of a viceroy long before who wanted to bring snow from the Pyrenees. Well, you see, I'm sorry, look at the bottom of 106. She says, she remarks in passing, I've seen snow. Well, on the Caribbean, we know that a Caribbean coast, that's going to be very difficult. And so, but he says, well, he wasn't alarmed. There were tales of a viceroy long before who wanted to bring snow from the Pyrenees to show to the natives, for he did not know that we had it right next to the sea in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. There's a big mountain right on the coast, or near the coast of Colombia. So there, the Sierra Nevada means snowy mountains, right? Perhaps with his innovative arts, Don Rodrigo de Buen Lozano had accomplished the feat. So this would be the viceroy who thought to bring snow from the Pyrenees. Again, if you want to go to the magical realism, a paragraph like that. Okay, well, yeah, some viceroy wanted to bring snow from Spain to show the people in Colombia. Come on, I mean, maybe that would be possible in someone's ideas, but the actual reality of it wouldn't be. Remember the first sentence of 100 Years of Solitude? It has to do with ice. I think when you grew up in a scorching hot climate, we should know this in Houston, except we have air conditioning, one fantasizes about the cold. So anyway, the snow appears here. So he wasn't surprised because there was this wild man who thought maybe he'd bring snow from Spain. No, said the girl, it was in a dream. She told him about it. She was sitting in front of a window where heavy snow was falling, while one by one she ate the grapes from a cluster she held in her lap. De Lauda felt a brush of dread. Trembling at the imminence of a final answer, he dared to ask, how did it end? I'm afraid to tell you, said Sierra Maria. He did not need to hear more. He closed his eyes and prayed for her. When he finished, he was a changed man. Don't worry, I promise you will soon be free and happy through the grace of the Holy Spirit. So he already sees the premonitory, the premonition, the premonitory value of this dream, which Lexi began by referring to last time. When you finish the last grape, you die. So he seems to know that about this dream. What do we do with something like this? We get these 3 mentions of this. We interpret it. We've just done that. We're students of literature, so we don't just say, well, this happens 3 times in a row. As a student of literature, you have to sort of ask these questions. Now, if we were just readers on the street, and one can perfectly well imagine reading this novel just for the great pleasure of the language, and not having to tear it apart like we do in literature classes. But even a naive reader, let me say, we're not naive readers because we read as a business. We read for interpretive reasons. We interpret for intellectual reasons and for artistic ones. We get more out of the book because we do this. We have to hope. But what would you do if you were a reader on the street? You'd just say, oh, I think I remember that reference to that dream someplace earlier. In fact, you might not even notice it. Maybe the 3rd time, since it's in the very last paragraph of the book, you'd notice it. But what do we as professional readers of literature do? We have to say, so what? We have to say, what is this about? What does this mean? So I've already suggested that there's the kind of, we are used to reading dreams psychologically. It's happened to all of us. I know it has. You wake up and you have this weird dream and you say, I wonder what that means. And oh yeah, well, yesterday this happened. Maybe my subconscious was working on this issue, or maybe not. Maybe you all don't do that with your dreams, or you don't think twice about them. But we almost always, most of us have to think about dreams sometimes, because dreams can be very scary, and you wake up saying, oh, glad that was just a dream. At least I do. And so what do we do about it as professional readers? Okay, somebody want to try more than I've tried? I mean, I think it's kind of hard to do something with this. Grapes and snow and... Yeah, Jenny, you help us out here. Give us a reading on this, will you?
Well, I'll try. Well, the snow to me represents like a purity that she has and that he has. That's really all I got. In the first part, when it talks about it was overlooking this place where the snow suffocated the lambs. Well, the lamb also to me is pure.
Yeah.
And also is a Christ symbol.
Yeah, Christ symbol, definitely.
So,
it sort of takes the whole thing to a kind of mythic level, but you're not quite sure what the myth is, in a sense. Would you go along with that?
Yeah. I'm not really sure what the grapes are.
I guess you could say also terribly Christian.
Well,
I mean,
and
every
the wine
church has grapevines because that's the blood
and the
of
wine,
Christ.
and then like the bitter wine that they gave Jesus on the cross.
Yeah.
So.
And the fact that his blood becomes the wine of the communion, so it is the body of Christ, and the lamb is also representative of that. So Garcia Marquez is putting in quite a lot of Christian imagery. This is, after all, a story about Christianity at a certain point in history, so we could read it like that, but eating these grapes ordinarily in Christian imagery would be a very good thing because you're taking communion. It's the wine or the grape juice if you come from a Protestant tradition where oftentimes wine isn't served at communion. But I think we'd have to push it. We'd say, well, as professional readers, we don't want to overdo it and say, the grapes mean Kroger's or the grapes mean Whole Foods. I mean, we could make a mistake and overread it and say, well, this equals that. But anybody else want to give that a shot? I mean, how were you affected when you saw for the 3rd time this dream? In any way in particular? I mean, obviously Lexi thought about it or she wouldn't have mentioned it. Yeah.
I just thought of the snow as the unlikely, sort of what you were referring to earlier. The whole, Neverland sort of surreal kind of picture that she was painting, that this is something very other.
Yeah, sort of the total fantasy of escape even, but a kind of bleak escape into this landscape where lambs are suffocating. Garcia Marquez will do this to us, and magical realism will do this to us as readers. It'll give us stuff that's not relevant, but we're used to reading the newspaper. We're used to reading realism. We're used to, in a realistic novel, the details always matter. Think of Agatha Christie. Think of a mystery, a murder mystery, where there are all these clues lying around. Sometimes there'll be a red herring, as we might call it. That is a fake clue that we're supposed to pull us off the track. But usually in realistic fiction, every detail matters. And we have to say, well, that leads to the next thing, which leads to the next thing. But in magical realism, lots of times causality is undermined. Now, what is causality? That's plot. This happened to me walking out of the front door of my house, and therefore I had to turn left instead of right. And when I turned left instead of right, I was hit by a truck. And then I had to go to the hospital. You see, that's what plot is. One thing leads to another. We think of our lives in those terms, don't we? We think, well, it was my responsibility that I turned left, you know, when I saw the truck coming, I should have stopped. So we think that we're in charge of cause and effect. The word causality is one you should be in charge of, C-A-U-S-A-L-I-T-Y. It's a whole philosophical discussion about causal forces. I mean, does God's foreknowledge, if we assume that God knows everything, God knows what's going to happen to me when I turn left, does that mean that I have to turn left? Questions of predestination, all of this goes back to how much control we have over what happens next.
Also, the second time that I read the dream, I knew it was going to be important because authors don't put things in books unless they really want you to know it.
Yeah.
So maybe in order to interpret the dream, we should see, like, why did she die? If we can figure that out and, like, connect that to the dream. Mm-hmm. And it says that she died from love.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, that has to connect.
And it says at the end she wants to die because she's madly eating the grapes faster than she as fast as she knows she needs to, so they won't grow back. So we can certainly interpret it in that way, absolutely, that it's a kind of escapist fantasy, and the ultimate escape for her is death. She just wants to die, and she does. What I guess I wanted to say, too, though, about the magical realism and causality is sometimes you're given stuff that you really just, you're going to have to say, well, I just don't know exactly what that means or why that happened. I like to go there with the whole issue of her death. I'd rather not make a decision, or I'd rather say, yes, all of these things are true at once. And it's hard. What magical realism, and this isn't as magical real as Garcia Marquez gets. In fact, as I said earlier, it's his most historical novel, where we actually have a historical setting rather than this kind of mythical Macondo, the town in 100 Years of Solitude, which you all must read if you haven't. It's the masterpiece of the 20th century, 100 Years of Solitude by Garcia Marquez. And it's the definition of magical realism. Stuff happens without any reason, and you're just supposed to say, okay, well, okay, that happened. The character rises to heaven, a character with sheets. She's hanging out sheets, and she suddenly goes up to heaven. And later on, her sister-in-law says, well, where are my sheets? She doesn't say, oh, that's rather unusual that character ascended into heaven. She says, where are my sheets? So we're asked not to ask some of the same kinds of questions we would ask of realism. Nonetheless, I think we're perfectly within our rights and indeed our duty as trained readers of literature to think about what this means. Anybody else want to make more comments? Yeah, Billy?
Well, first of all, does everyone agree that she is not possessed, or she is possessed, or is this something that we're just...
Would you like us to vote?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not kidding you. I mean, does everybody or anyone think she's actually possessed, which means you believe in the possession by devils? Okay. Anybody believe she's possessed? Okay, 1, 2.
Well, I want to believe that she's possessed. I don't want to believe that she's rabies. It's too boring and ordinary.
Okay, yeah.
And I also, I'm trying to find it, but when it talks about, when she's talking to Martina about the demons that she sees,
yeah.
she's like, I want to meet them.
Uh-huh.
Do you remember that part?
Yeah, I do,
like,
yeah.
I'll sell my life, or I'll sell my soul.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
It says she escapes with 6 of them, and I think she's referring to the demons. So, I don't know.
So she thinks she's possessed in any case, or she sees demons. Now, so, okay, Billy, hang on. We're taking a poll here. Men and women in the classroom, not on the street. Okay, Lisa, what do you think about this?
Neither. I don't think she's possessed, nor do I think rabies has. I think her circumstances have brought her here because she's doesn't fit into the different molds of society. What a young woman of a upper class should be doing, and she doesn't. It doesn't make sense that she speaks 3 slave languages and on and on and on, and she's never been taken out into white society and this sort of thing. I think she just doesn't fit any mold. Her circumstances with the rabies put her sort of under a spotlight, so suddenly she was put inside, and I don't think she's either.
Yeah, because in your reading, the only way to figure out her incredibly idiosyncratic behavior is to figure that, well, it's to figure, yeah, one or the other. But it ends up being figured that she is possessed because she behaves in this way. So, okay, so that's a non-possession one. Yes, Ashley?
And then at the very beginning of the book, when I first started reading, it uses the term miracle to describe what she does.
Yeah. Right.
So not him to believe that maybe she wasn't possessed.
Yeah, but does that mean you believe that miracles were performed by her intercession? Then you believe in miracles then as a reader?
Well, I just think that her position was not that she was demonically possessed, that
that rather
because of the way
she
he
was
describes
possessed by God.
the first 3 pages of the novel.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Sarah, did you want to weigh in on this? This is a great way to go about this question, I think. Yeah.
I don't think she's either possessed or. I mean, I think she's sad because her parents have rejected her. You know, she's lashing out. She's angry. She's screaming, you know, and it looks like possession, but nobody really knows how she feels and what's going on.
Yeah, and we haven't even discussed the matter of her parents. I mean, the mother figures pretty magical, real, too, or at least excessive in certain ways, and the father is excessive in other ways. We haven't even discussed, and this seems to be a disjunction in the cultural norms as well. But yeah, there's plenty of reason for her to be upset. Let's say. So, okay, so Billy, do you want to take it back to where you started now? Now we have a kind of sense about this. You're reacting to my comment that I think it's all of them. Okay, maybe I don't really. But it's a bit what Ashley was just saying. When the novel presents it in a certain way, you have to say a lot of people in this novel believe she was possessed. Do I believe in possession? Well, not really, no.
I meant just as a reader, you've got to put yourself into a magical, realistic, however you want to say it, world. So you have to suspend your own personal beliefs and get into what's going on here. So, yeah, I'll believe in possession here, but I believe with, I guess, the majority is that it's none of the above. If anything, she may be a saint, and her idiosyncratic behavior is anything but just innocence. And if she is... Who's
the Laura?
Maria.
Oh, Maria's, is anything but innocent,
So maybe, you know, if you want to go, if you have to go to an extreme, then if she's performing miracles and all this, then maybe, if anything else, she's a saint, but I don't think that either. I think it's just none of the above. I think your causality was the believed exorcism which brought her there to meet De Laura, you say his name, and and the dreams, though, is what I wanted to talk about when I first started, but I wanted to know how everybody felt about the exorcism because I didn't feel she was possessed, is that the dreams just showed a connection between the two of them.
Yeah.
And
that they have the same dream is, after all, quite a link, isn't it? Yeah.
And each one of them, she's eating the grapes, but she knows that in order to die, all she has to do is eat all the grapes. Mm-hmm. But it's saying she's in no rush. You know, she's happy. Everything's okay. Mm-hmm. At the end, the only time it mentions that she realizes that as she's looking out here, that she finally realizes he's not coming back.
Yeah.
Well, that's when she eats all the grapes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that just seems
to be a real
reason.
indicator of her, let's say, her mental state and her actual situation too.
And the snow and the purity and the lamb and the grapes and all that would go to her not being possessed. I thought it kind of had two things going on there.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. I think that's useful. So we're talking both about a psychological state from being okay to being not okay, and we're also talking about, let's say, her relationship to Catholic categories, if you want, and maybe the category isn't demonic, but rather Christological. Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah. Anybody want to add to that? Yeah. Ron.
I guess I have much more of a simplistic view of it. I don't think she was possessed or saw demons or any of that. I think she was basically a compulsive liar and intentionally misled everyone in the convent because she didn't trust anybody. It wasn't her culture. She didn't fit in. She didn't want to. She wanted them to think something of her that wasn't true, wasn't accurate.
Yeah, she's
she didn't
bad
care if they
girl
thought,
here.
she was possessed.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think that's simplistic. I think that might be a kind of defensive reaction. Plus, we know that she, at one point it's said that she could walk by Christians without their noticing her. She imagines herself invisible. She would just as soon be, but when she can no longer be invisible, then the behavior is what we've seen. Yeah. Lisa.
I think that you make a great point, but I think it being a 12-year-old girl who's been ripped out of home, your hearth, your sort of nurturing environment, I think that's exactly right, that her defensive technique would be to lie and act up.
Yeah. Jenny?
Well, but at the same time, she was a liar at home, too, I think. I mean, she was never honest. And I don't think we can really say that she was ripped out like from her parents because they kind of ignored her, and her mom was, well, the slaves, yeah, right. I mean, her mom was in her bedroom like drunk all the time, but I think part of it also is that just by growing up with the slaves who had a different culture and a different view on maybe demons and things like that, because when her father's taking her to the convent, he says, "Do you know who God is?" And she said no. So I think that she's out of the realm of Catholicism and Christianity, and she just doesn't know. And so, the slaves have said, well, there are like these demons running around, and so she believes it, and that's what she thinks is going on, and
Yeah, no, however we slice the confusion of a 12-year-old girl, I do think partly this is a huge critique of colonial structures. The racism, the imposing Catholicism. So even though we're going to see, and we have seen this discussion of syncretism as positive, as a strength of Latin American culture, we're also going to see here that it has its real downsides. I mean, that's something Fuentes doesn't want to, you pointed that out a long time ago. Fuentes basically wants to say, isn't this terrific that we've all come to, these cultures have converged, and now we're the cultures that we have become, and very interesting cultures, and I guess I want to say, yeah, that's right. Remember I said he wrote that book under the sign of 1992, the quincentenary of the discovery, where in Mexico there's a huge diatribe about not one single government penny being spent to celebrate the destruction of the indigenous world, and he doesn't really want to go there. He wants to say, look, cultures win and lose, and too bad, and it's not great, and the colonization wasn't great, but are we going to deny who we are? Are we going to say that 1492 didn't happen, or 1521 in the case of Mexico? So Fuentes is got a particular political spin, and here I think in this novel Garcia Marquez has another. He wants to show us that colonial culture was oppressive, and if we don't believe it, look at this girl who doesn't fit into these hierarchies and therefore is basically tortured and killed. But that, you see, maybe she's really possessed. Anyway, I see her as being tortured and killed, largely, even though I said I wasn't going to come down on one side or the other. Let's look at the syncretism for a minute here. There's very specific and almost funny renditions of this notion that we've been tracing. Look at page 11. This is Dominga de Adviento. Dominga de Adviento is in the middle of the page 11. A formidable black woman who ruled the house with an iron fist until the night before her death was the link between these two worlds, the rulers and the servants. Tall and bony and possessed of an almost clairvoyant intelligence, it was she who had reared Sierva Maria. Dominga de Adviento became a Catholic without renouncing her Yoruban beliefs, and she practiced both religions at the same time and at random. Her soul was healthy and at peace, she said, because what she did not find in one faith was there in the other. And so forth. That's where we need to end there, but she will also see that she mediates between the Marquis and his wife. So there's that. Now, that's Dominga. We're going to see her again, but let's go to the bishop, page 102. The bishop is an interesting figure. Obviously, he's ruling over, or the main, let's say, authority figure for this exorcism, which we see has disastrous ends. But there's something sympathetic about him, and it's his comments that Garcia Marquez gives to him about the situation in New Spain, or New Granada. It's not New Spain. New Spain is Mesoamerica. The next viceroyalty is New Granada, beneath to the south. You have that map on your website. Let's see, the abbess. It's about a quarter of the way down. We still lack definitive proof. Do you see that? 3 paragraphs down. But the act of the convent tells us that the poor creature is possessed by the demons, said the bishop. The abbess knows this better than we do. She thinks you have fallen into the snare of Satan, said the viceroy. Not we alone, but all of Spain, said the bishop. We have crossed the ocean sea to impose the law of Christ, and we have done so with masses and processions and festivals for patron saints, but not in the souls of men. He spoke of, I would say, the Yucatan. He spoke of the Yucatan. We know that's Mexico. We know that's Maya country, that part of Mexico that goes up, a kind of peninsula. You know where the Yucatan is. He spoke of the Yucatan, where they had constructed sumptuous cathedrals to hide the pagan pyramids, not realizing that the natives came to Mass because their sanctuaries still lived beneath the silver altars. That's pure definition of syncretism. He spoke of the chaotic mixing of blood that had gone on since the conquest, Spanish blood with Indian blood, and both of these with blacks of every sort, even Mandingo Muslims. And he asked himself whether such miscegenation, that's intermarriage, right, or mixing of blood, miscegenation had a place in the kingdom of God. Despite his obstructed breathing and his old man's cough, he ended without conceding a pause to the viceroy. How can all this be but snares of the enemy? No, what can all this be but snares of the enemy? The viceroy showed his distress. The disenchantment of your grace is of the utmost gravity, he said. Do not view it in that light, your excellency, the bishop said in the most courteous manner. I am only attempting to clarify the strength of faith we require so that these people may be worthy of our sacrifice. So he comes back to the party line in a way. Yes, I'll go to martyrdom if I have to in order this sacrifice he refers to in order to convert peoples and so forth. But there's something, I think, trenchant, or let's say something like it sticks up like a sore thumb, this little discussion of the Yucatan here in Cartagena. Well, he's been posted to the Yucatan. Garcia Marquez understands that Mexico or Mesoamerica is somehow precisely the most miscegenated place of all, though not, that doesn't necessarily hold true, but the reference to the pyramids and the cathedrals, I think we have to take seriously here. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? It's part of the discussion of the colonial setting that we're living at the moment. Go to one more if you would. It's page 114. Again, this is kind of put on the table. What do we do with it? Well, I guess it depends. Look at the bottom of 113. Discussion with Abre Nuncio, De Laura and Abre Nuncio. Abre Nuncio, we're told, Portuguese Jew who's fled the Inquisition to Cartagena, which is somewhat ironic because Cartagena was the center of the Inquisition for this part of the New World. But anyway, we'll take that. He keeps books in his library that are on the index. That means on the list of forbidden books. But somehow he's under the radar screen talking to a priest about Voltaire. Voltaire was radically anti-Catholic. So here we have this, again, a kind of odd conjunction of things. We have the sense that this is an outpost of empire. If this had been going on in Portugal or Spain, he would be in trouble, as apparently he was since he fled to Cartagena. So let's just say he's there and he's reading books that are forbidden by the Catholic Church and discussing them with a priest. let's see, just 3 short paragraphs up from the bottom of 113. I ask because of your remark about Voltaire, said Abbe Nuncio. His is a perfect prose. And the one that wounds us most, said de Laura, what a shame it was written by a Frenchman. You say that because you're a Spaniard, said Abbe Nuncio. See this mezcolanza, this mixture of peoples and countries and so forth. At my age, and with so much mixing of bloodlines, I am no longer certain where I come from, said de Laura, or who I am. No one knows in these kingdoms, said Abbe Nuncio, and I believe it will be centuries before they find out. So here again, a kind of look at this mixing of classes, of national groups, though Spain and France hardly existed as the countries we know them now. But the idea is here to suggest that this is the colonial situation. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it celebrated, as Fuentes does? I don't think so. It's shown as incredibly complicated. The other part I'd go to, if I were tracing the presentation of syncretism, would be, of course, to the priest whom we discussed last time, Santo Tomás de Aquino, sorry, not Santo Tomás, Tomás, yeah, Father. Tomás de Aquino y Narváez. Let's look at him for a minute. He's right around here someplace. My page numbers aren't so great. Sorry. It's 131, I believe. Go there. Nope. Anybody got Narváez down? Oh, yeah, it's 132. Sorry. Keep going. Father Tomás de Aquino de Narváez. Look at this long paragraph. We'll just look at it. We see him again as a kind of admirable figure. So Garcia Marquez isn't going to say it's all great. It's not going to say that all these people were evil and that they were terrible torturers of indigenous peoples. He's showing their belief system. He's trying to put us back into the 18th century as readers, rather than allowing us to stay out and say, well, it's just really horrible what those people did at the end of the 18th century. They were just... I think he wants us to suspend our judgment. It's the bottom of 131 where he comes and takes her necklaces, and I think that is important because I want to show you some of Mary Magdalene's necklaces in a minute. A big point is made of them. Bottom of 131. He took them from his pocket just as the superior of the convent had returned them to him in response to his demands. He hung them around Sierra Maria's neck. He named and defined each one in African languages. The red and white of the love and blood of Chango, the red and black of the life and death of Elegea, the 7 aqua and pale blue beads of Yemaya. If I were really a great professor, I would have looked up all of these belief systems. Maybe someone will want to do that in a paper. He moved with subtle tact from Yoruban to Congolese and from Congolese to Mandingo, and she followed suit with grace and fluency. You see, she's perfectly handleable if she's spoken to in languages she understands. If at the end he changed to Castilian, it was only out of consideration for the abbess who could not believe that Sierra Maria was capable of so much sweetness. He was Father Tomás de Aquino de Narváez, a former prosecutor of the Holy Office in Seville. Now, what is the Holy Office? It's the Inquisition. He's been a prosecutor of the Inquisition. The most intelligent, theologically inclined priests were made prosecutors because they were in the business of judging the behavior of, let's say, someone out of line against the rules what defined in line. So we think of the Inquisition as a bunch of horrible tortures, but at the time, and they did prosecute people whose beliefs weren't in line. So you can say it's a terribly authoritarian and terribly dogmatic organization, but at the time it was those people who, like judges in our courts today, are considered to know the law and therefore run the trial. So he was one of those for the Inquisition in Seville, and now parish priest in the slave district. He is, by the way, there's a paper on your website based on a particular saint, a particular priest who worked with the slaves in Cartagena named Saint Peter Claver, C-L-A-V-E-R. and you'll find some material on the website. Someone wrote on this subject. And that's interesting because he's taking historical details from Cartagena of the time. If you go to Cartagena today, the biggest, nicest church is dedicated to St. Peter Claver, whose bones lie under the altar. He called himself the slave of the slaves. He wished to serve the slaves. So this is based on a figure of history. And now, parish priest in the slave district, whom the bishop, his health impaired, had selected to replace him in the exorcism. Father Tomas, had brought 11 heretics, Jews and Muslims, to the stake. But his reputation was based above all on the countless souls he had wrested away from the most cunning demons in Andalusia, the south of Spain, where Seville is. Notice the heretics he's brought to trial, brought to the stake, has seen to the burning alive of Jews and Muslims. We know that's the result of 1492 and its aftermath, where Jews and Muslims are asked to convert or to leave. Heretics would be people here, Jews and Muslims, who are either pretending to Christianity or haven't left, one or the other. But he saved a lot of people too, you see, from the most cunning of demons in Andalusia. He had refined taste and manners of the sweet diction of the Canary Islands, right, the Canaries. He had Spanish territory. He had been born here. Look at that here. I meant to refer to the we that we saw a minute ago too. This is narrated by a kind of communal narrator that knows this territory. He'd been born here. This is someone who lives in Cartagena telling us this story. It's not someone in particular. It's the point of view that we're getting, that this is a kind of communal narrative, and these things are known at the time. He had been born here, the son. If it were a regular, realistic, retrospective narrative, it would be there. He was born there. I'm telling you a story about what happened there, right? The son of a royal solicitor who married his quadroon slave, and he had spent his novitiate in the local seminary once the purity of his lineage over 4 generations of white had been demonstrated. Anybody know about pureza de la sangre? Purity of blood? No. In Spanish, it's a different sort of racism, if you want. It is you had to prove over 4 generations that you weren't Jew. You weren't Jewish. So people could not come to the New World if they were new Christians. Remember, we talked about this with Fuentes, when Fuentes is discussing this. So when you see here, it's not the U.S. racist idea that 1 drop of black blood makes you black, which was the rule for judging this kind of thing, what race you were, instead of saying, well, I'm a mixture. Here, the terrible prejudice is not against blacks, but against Jews. His distinguished achievements earned him a doctorate in Seville, where he lived and preached until he was 50. On his return to his native land, comings and goings between Spain and the New World, he requested the humblest parish, became an enthusiast of African religions and languages, and lived lived among the slaves like a slave. No one seemed more capable of communicating with Sierva Maria and better prepared to confront her demons. There's no doubt here. The narrator has no doubt, gives us no reason to doubt that Father Tomas thinks she's not possessed. He's ready to confront her demons. He's ready to see to this case, to help her. It's not like maybe she's possessed and maybe she's not. No. Sierva Maria recognized him at once as an archangel of salvation, and she was not mistaken. And we think, oh, goody, the novel's almost over, she's free. No. In her presence, he took apart the arguments in the act and proved to the abbess that none of them was conclusive. I can see where you get your conspiracy theory here, at least it does seem like he's so directly in contrast with what she wants, which is to see this thing done with in a hurry that...
For me, I also felt like I did read it as he didn't see her as possessed. That's what I read that as. I read that whole passage as he didn't think she was. No one seemed more capable of communicating with her. But for me, I read it as he didn't find her to be possessed. The abbess said she had never known she was capable of such sweetness. I felt like this priest found her to be a sweet, normal girl that was just so totally normal, and that he was going to take apart the acta as an absolutely false document or an exaggeration in every step.
Well, we've been told up above that he does believe in demons. Now, whether he believes that she's possessed is another matter, but we are told he's wrested away countless souls from the most cunning demons in Andalusia, the middle of that paragraph, and we're going to get another reference to demons that I think we have to imagine that someone who is a prosecutor for the Holy Office does believe in demonic possession.
Definitely does believe in demonic possession, but I felt that he took one look at her, and because he was such an expert in this, he'd clearly, burned folks at the stake, that he could see that this was not an example of a possession, and that the fact that he says here, he took apart the arguments in the acta and proved that none was conclusive, that he was sort of looking at her demons as the demons on the paper that he needed to disprove, but that he clearly saw that this was just a bunch of paperwork.
I think it's possible to read it that way, that somehow she's been framed, that she's been wrongly accused, that he can help her in that way.
Knowledgeable enough, or whatever it was, to know.
Yeah.
They weren't knowledgeable enough to, or as expert as he is, to see that she wasn't possessed.
Okay, that's a possibility. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Billy?
Just that I read that the same way.
Okay.
And even when he pinches her on the cheek and he tells her, "Sleep well, I have dealt with worse enemies," in front of the abbess, it comes across as saying, "Don't worry, I can
handle the
demons."
abbess.
It was more like, "I can handle the abbess."
Oh, okay.
But as far as the conspiracy theory, later when the abbess is like, I was happy to comply. All I want is her out of here. I don't care how we do it."
Yeah.
When they part ways, it says that she had no idea she would never see him again. So she wasn't anything to do with Father.
Yeah, I think we would have to. It would be hard to imagine an abbess running out and slaying a priest and getting away with it. Furthermore, so okay, let's keep on going here, because there are more references to this. But you see here, I guess, this whole business about syncretism and mixing of cultures and so forth. Here we see a very admirable character. He understands the importance of African religions. He's a Christian, but he's not trying to just say, oh, those are worthless. He becomes interested. He speaks African languages. And what happens to him? Well, we know what happens to him. So it's not that he's going to somehow hold the day in this novel, but nonetheless we're given something that isn't just, well, these people were all, these colonizing Catholic clergy were all monsters. He doesn't want us to come away with that idea. Sierva Maria, at the bottom of the 132, Sierva Maria recognized him at once as the archangel of salvation, and she was not mistaken. In her presence, he took apart the arguments of the acta and proved to the abbess that none of them was conclusive. He informed her that the demons of America were the same as those of Europe, but that summoning them and controlling them were different. He explained the 4 common rules for recognizing demonic possession and helps her to see how easy it was for the demon to manipulate these so that the opposite would be believed. He took his leave of Sierva Maria with an affectionate pinch on her cheek. "Sleep well, I have dealt with worse enemies." And yeah, it's interesting to read the enemies here as the abbess. I continue to read them more or less as the demons, but he's going to figure out these American demons. But either way, he's going to be shortly drowned. The abbess was so well disposed that she invited him to have a cup of the celebrated aromatic chocolate of the Clarissans with the anisette biscuits and confectionery miracles reserved for the elect. As they ate and drank in her private refectory, he imparted his instructions for the measures that were to be taken next. The abbess was happy to comply. "I have no interest in whether things go well for that unhappy creature. What I do beg of God is that she leave this convent at once." Okay, so we'll leave this scene here, but again, not only does it have to do with the possession issue, but also with the syncretism issue that we're looking at in the novel. Ron, now that you've proposed your paper topic here, it would be worth looking into the Clarissans as well as a historical order. As I said, they're the female counterpart to the Franciscans, but they had huge presence in Cartagena. The Clarissan, by the way, the Clarissan, I was just in Cartagena last year. I did a sentimental journey with my husband. I think I've told you I was in the Peace Corps in the late 60s after we graduated from college, and we hadn't been back because of some of the violence that has shaken Colombia over the past 3 or 4 decades. But we went back last summer for the first time, well, summer now before last, and it was a great pleasure. We went to our village. There are now 2 stoplights in the village. Progress has hit, and there are cars, and not everyone's riding horses anymore as we were at that time. But what's interesting is when we went to Cartagena, where we had been 40 years ago as well, and the place where this Clarissan monument, or monastery, well, convent, I should say, convent is now a luxury hotel, just as he says in his introductory comment, the one that's dated 1994. So I kept looking around the hotel. We weren't staying in that hotel, but we went and looked around because of this novel. I wanted to see it. And, you know, it's a kind of interesting place where they've kept some feel of an enclosed convent, the cloisters and so forth. But there's absolutely no mention at all of this novel, which I would have thought there would be some corner where they'd say, oh, Garcia Marquez wrote about this. But no, I guess I'm the only literary tourist, or not so many of us. But anyway, you might think about looking into that, as well as the whole issue of what exorcism was at the time and how that was manipulated in this particular part of the world. As I said, Cartagena was a great center for the Holy Office or Inquisition, so that might be kind of interesting to pursue. Let me show you some pictures, can I? I've said, and we haven't talked other than kind of the cultural fate of Sierra Maria, how she's caught in the crosshairs of her culture, and we all are to some extent, but most of us don't die from it. I mean, we're all products of our culture, of course, and to the extent that we rebel against our culture is the extent to which we're either happy or not happy oftentimes, but that's another story. I want to show you a few pictures of Mary Magdalene, because I think she's the model, as I think St. Peter Claver is the model for Father Tomás de Aquino. There's historical stuff going on here. Remember this, and I'm going to show you some pictures of a Baroque Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene was very popular during the Baroque period. That's the period we're talking about here in this novel, starting in the 17th century in Europe. And I'll just show you a few kind of models of Baroque art. We're going to talk about it more. This is Bernini's statue in Rome called the Transverberation of Saint Teresa, or the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa. Saint Teresa was a nun, and she wrote about her ecstasy. Her ecstasy, which means ecstasis, standing outside yourself. It means the union of the worshiper with God in terms of Catholic culture. Ecstasy is a good thing. You have become united with God. Here you see there's a kind of eroticism inherent here. What's going on? This is an angel. This is not Cupid, please. He's got wings, although Cupid sometimes does too. He has an arrow. The arrow is, there's a place where in the writings of Saint Teresa where she says, my heart was pierced by the word of God. That's what transverberation means. This is very much the female mystic, the female possessed, as it were, but by God. Therefore, we don't use the word possession, and certainly not demonic possession. She's possessed by God's Spirit. So this whole idea is a very sort of, you know, the two sides of a single coin, possessed by the devil or ecstatically united with God and Christ. So the mystics, as they're called, her counterpart, she's a Carmelite. The Carmelites had been founded a long time before that. It's an order of nuns and priests. They're both called Carmelites. But she was the reformer of the order, so of the discalced Carmelites, they're called, descalzos, meaning without shoes. She reformed the order and said, look, we're going to have a vow to poverty and chastity and obedience, but especially poverty. Her counterpart is St. John of the Cross. He also is a mystic and is often shown with his head, his eyes rolling into the back of his head. If you want to contrast the Baroque to what came before it, which is the Renaissance, take this statue, which is, of course, Michelangelo's David, as in David and Goliath, that thing over his shoulders, the slingshot. It's sort of before he's done the deed, before he's killed Goliath. But look at this contained corporeality, and then look, if you will, at this statue once again. It's just a totally different style. The Baroque starts in Europe with the 1600s, figure the 17th century in Europe, but it goes longer. It starts later, about 1640, and goes through the 18th century. So we could find tons of stuff in this novel if we wanted to, and in fact I have wanted to, that is Baroque. This is a Baroque city. It's toward the end of the Baroque period. Voltaire is the opposite. Voltaire is neoclassical. You have Jefferson and Franklin reading the philosophes, the French neoclassicists. But this is still the Baroque world of the Counter-Reformation. So then let's just see how we do here. This is a Magdalene. This is Mary Magdalene by Caravaggio. We wouldn't know necessarily. Caravaggio is one of the great Baroque painters. This actually is dated 1596, this painting. It's 4 years before the 17th century, 1600s. But Caravaggio really is one of the initiators of Baroque painting. It's realistic, it's emotional, it's theatrical. Well, you say, what's so theatrical about this? Here she's asleep. Well, yeah, she's not like Bernini's St. Teresa in ecstasy. She's asleep, but we know she is the Magdalene because the painting is labeled that, but it's also, we know without the label because of this. I'm going to show you a detail of this. The pearls and the vessel of oil are Mary Magdalene's attributes. What are attributes? Attributes is a word that you use in art history to say, you know, St. Peter is always going to have keys. You'll know it's St. Peter also because he's got a fringed beard and a little fringe of white hair. Why keys? Because Christ gives him the keys to the kingdom. He says, found the church, Peter, upon you. So those keys to the church. St. Paul will always have a sword. If you learn the visual lexicon, you'll know that pearls and this vessel of oil. Why the vessel of oil? Who knows about the Magdalene?
She anointed his feet.
She anointed Christ's feet with her tears. I'm sorry, she anointed his feet with oil. And then there's another scene where a woman who becomes Mary Magdalene washes his feet with her tears and dries them with her hair. So the other attribute is going to be the long hair. You see, there it is. It's not as clear as it might be. Furthermore, this costume would have been, and I read art history books, I didn't know this, but I read it, that this is the costume of a prostitute. She was a prostitute or a courtesan whom Christ converts, right? And then she becomes, anybody read the Da Vinci Code? There's quite a lot about the Magdalene in that. Some people now, there are actually cults to her now because it's thought by some, especially feminist Christians, that she was Christ's consort, Christ's wife, if you want, Christ's partner. I mean, why shouldn't there be a goddess someplace? Well, the Virgin Mary takes that role, the virgin rather than the sexualized partner of Christ. I don't have any opinion on it. I'm just interested in her representation in Baroque art. What I point out to, and I'll go back to the detail here. Look at what a genius this guy Caravaggio is. He shows this reflection 3 times. He wants to show the shimmering reflection, this kind of, even though we have the Magdalene sleeping, why is she sleeping? Because she has converted. How do we know that she's converted? Because she's torn off the pearls that symbolize her luxurious life as a prostitute and thrown them on the floor. You'll see more examples I'm going to show you of these pearls, and this is where the necklaces of Maria Sierva Maria come in a little bit. Is this necklace thing is really very much an attribute of Mary Magdalene beyond her long torrents of hair. These, by the way, are Baroque pearls. Baroque pearl means lumpy pearl. The word baroque seems to mean excrescence or lump or hump or bump. At least you can go into a pearl shop to this day or a jewelry shop and say baroque pearl, and they'll bring you out a bunch of oddly shaped things, right? What is a pearl made from? It's made from a piece of grit in a gastropod. It doesn't have to be just an oyster. Snails also, they go along eating off the ground. Their little foot is their stomach. That's what gastropod means. And sometimes a piece of grit will get in, and then the organism itself starts to protect itself against the grit by encasing it in what becomes a pearl. Perfect metaphor for conversion. A piece of grit becomes a beautiful pearl. A unconverted self becomes a beautiful soul. So the pearls aren't accidental. You can read them like a book, and you will almost always see this vessel of oil along with Mary Magdalene. Okay, now I'm going to take you to others. Let me just make sure. Oh, no, here we go. Here's another example. This is by a Spanish Baroque painter called Alonso del Arco, and he's showing the moment of conversion. What is she doing? She's ripping off her pearls. It's a kind of before and after, if you want, because the pearls are both on her neck and also down here. I'll show you those details. More Baroque pearls, these very valued irregular pearls. But what are these? The pearls, when they're not strung together in this context, suggest her liberation. She's been converted from that life of sin. And what else? Her tears. They symbolize her tears. She becomes the great convert and the great penitent. She's so sorry about her former life. Why? And she becomes this really constantly reproduced in painting during the 17th century. Why is penance such a big deal? Because the Protestants have thrown out penance as a sacrament. Are Protestants asked or required to confess to a priest and do atonement? No. According to Martin Luther, if you're a believer and you're sorry, that's good enough. So penance then becomes, of the 7 Catholic sacraments during the 17th century, 16th century, and 17th, with the Protestant Reformation, 5 are thrown out. 5 are thrown out. And we can get into that later, but so the conversion is important because the Catholic Church has lost 1/3 of its believers in Europe, and because it's trying to convert believers all over the world, and also, and the penance is important because the challenge to the sacrament of penance and atonement is very real for the Protestants, from the Protestants, the challenge. So, okay.
It looks like it's lining up like a rosary to me. That look at it right away. And
Oh, that's interesting. That's a very interesting point. Yeah, that would be just fine. Yeah, that's very interesting. Suggesting that the broken pearls, which are the sign of liberation, the sign of her sadness, her tears, lead her to a life of prayer. Yeah, that would do. Take you back here. So we kind of a before and after, as I said, in this painting. If I can get it back, let's see. I thought I was doing that right. No. Humpty Dum. There we go. I'm not going to show you these right at the moment. Sorry about that. You're going to see them just quickly. Back to this one in particular by Alonso del Arco. You see what she's doing with her left hand is pushing away that world of luxury. We see here the perfume bottle, but it's the perfume bottle before she's going to wash. So it's a kind of ironic. It really had perfume, her little jewelry box here, and so forth. Pushing that away, looking out and above, and of course the long hair, of course the female flesh. She was painted a lot in part because she was one of the figures that painters could paint nude or partially nude females. There were requirements about that. It wasn't as, let's say, prudish a world as 19th and 20th centuries have been about flesh, but Saint Sebastian was the man that was always portrayed, the male, because he could be portrayed nude as well, or largely nude. Let me show you just a few more Magdalens. What does this have to do with this novel? Something, maybe not a lot, but what I think about Garcia Marquez is that he was coming out of a cultural context where the Magdalene would have been super known. It's a wonder to me that there aren't several characters in here named Mary Magdalene, or that he didn't. I mean, Mary is too obvious. We do have the Maria, Sierra Maria, but he might well have named her that, because there so many things are similar. Oh, sorry, wrong place. Let me see where we are. There's more imagery.
Significance in the three reflections, like the number 3, or you just clear out the
I'm sorry, would you say that again?
the 3 reflections on the pearl?
Oh, I wouldn't make too much of the 3, although I suppose we could talk about the Trinity if we wanted to. But I guess the thing I was just looking at is the visual way that he makes the pearl reflect in the oil, which reflects up onto the glass, which seems then to reflect back onto the so I was just noticing that. I guess I don't want to make too much of the 3 there, though it's a thought. Hadn't thought of it. Okay, wait, it's 50. Where am I going? I'm going 56. Here again, a few more Magdalens. Saints have often, I mean, she has a biblical basis, though Mary Magdalene is often given, for example, it's not mentioned that it's Mary Magdalene that wipes Christ's feet, and anoints his feet. A woman, we're told. But several references to unidentified women have kind of been lumped into the story of Mary Magdalene. But what we don't know, we know from the Bible that she goes to find the tomb open. She's at the foot of the cross. If you ever see a crucifixion with women at the bottom, it will always be the suffering mother, the mother of Christ, and it'll always be Mary Magdalene, and she'll always have her hair done, and she'll be looking a little hysterical because she's an ecstatic herself in lots of ways. And a third Mary who's kind of generically identified. 3 women and a man. The man is St. John. Those are biblical by biblical, let's say, identification. We also know that she goes. Cody, you know the Bible, don't you? I think I've noticed you reading your Bible. Remember, she goes and finds the tomb open. She's the one who finds the tomb open. And then she says, where is my God? And she sees a figure who seems would know something. She thinks it's the gardener. Remember this part? This is a big part of the crucifixion story, that she thinks it's a gardener, and then she recognizes that it's Christ. And she says, oh, my Lord. And he says, don't touch me. I haven't yet risen to my Lord. So there are a lot of painters of her reaching out to touch Christ, who's looking ethereal, and his saying, no, don't do that. After that, we don't have any biblical account of her, but there's a huge amount of legend that grows up around her and many other saints as well, that she goes to the south of France and that she goes into penance. Here we have her in a cave. This is a cave in a penitential setting, and that she's fed by angels. You'll find paintings of angels bringing down her lunch to her because she's so concentrated on her suffering. So here we have, guess what? The vial we would know in a minute. Not if we had only the hair, we would know, but we would also know from the vessel that it is the Magdalene. Now we have added the skull in the book, the skull of memento mori, reminding you that the things of this world are transitory, and that you need to focus on your things in heaven, and of course the book, devotion to God's Word. So we have all of these things here. Let's see, did I say who that was by? I've forgotten. Oh yeah, Philippe de Champagne was that one. The French loved painting the Magdalene because she was supposed to have gone to France after Christ's death. And there are places in the south of France where to this day there's a great devotion to that particular saint. This is an Italian version, Guido Reni, R-E-N-I. We see the same scene, that penitential scene, in the cave, and what is she doing? She's visualizing Christ on the cross. I mean, she's looking at the crucifix. The better to understand and participate in Christ's suffering. There was a whole thing in the Baroque that you could visualize. You could visualize Christ on the cross. And the more you would concentrate it on your visual imagination, or you looked at a beautiful painting, the more you would enter into the moment, as it were. Unlike the Protestants' bare walls on those churches in Massachusetts, the Protestants came to think that the visual image was an interruption to your worship, that you needed to have a vertical and verbal relationship to Christ. Images were okay if they were accompanied by texts, but on their own, you really shouldn't let some unanchored believer emote in front of a suffering Christ, in front of a Magdalene of this sort. Notice the folds, notice the drapery of this Magdalene. We would have noticed that in others if I'd pointed it out. The Baroque loved this kind of showing off. This is a painter showing off what he can do on a flat piece of canvas to make it look incredibly deep. The depth, the folds. Look at how the light is manipulated to give a sense of movement and depth. This is something that the Baroque really started, and it has a lot to do with drapery, this idea of the fold, this kind of continuous, sinuous line, and that kind of thing is very hard to do, apparently. So this is a Latin American and Mexican example of a Magdalene. I think it's a very different feel, a different flavor, if you want, tone in the Magdalene. She's less coquettish, less elegant. I mean, we still have some of the textured fabric, probably a less accomplished artist. His name is known, by the way, but I won't bother you with it. Look at, she's in ecstasy, this Magdalene. We know because of her eyes. We see that her eyes aren't quite rolled back, but she's not focusing in any normal way. She's in communion with Christ as she kind of looks at this crucifix. It's hard to see, but there it is, the body of Christ here. So swooning, the hair, the flesh, all of it there. We don't have the vessel that I can see in this painting, but what we know is that she's in her penitential state. If you had to put a picture on a cover of this novel, there's this odd kind of humorous one on the original. This is the original hardcover with a lot of her hair, of course, but it's kind of cartoonish. I would have rather put something like this one, in a way, to suggest the suffering, though it would have been the wrong suggestion because it would have showed Maria as a Christian, which we know she wasn't. But nonetheless, this kind of feeling of exhaustion, this feeling of giving up, it seems to me to be here. That's the last one that's relevant for our purposes. So anyway, I just wanted to show you these and suggest that there are ways in which you can analyze art and literature together if you want. It's something that I like to do, and in fact have done with this novel in a book I published last year, if anyone's interested. I mean, I don't discuss the book for very long, but I'm interested in the Baroque sources of Garcia Marquez's characters, and so I talk about this novel in terms of the iconography of saints, and also, more particularly, the iconography of Mary Magdalene. Okay, I'm going to let you go. Yeah, Lisa.
Just one comment. The page before the foreword by Thomas Aquinas, it says, for common Balcells, I don't know who she is, bathed in tears.
Yes, right, exactly. That is a kind of parody of this notion of ecstatic suffering. Carmen Balcells is his literary agent. She's very known, and she's made tons of money for herself and for Latin American authors. She works in Barcelona, so it's his literary agent. But thank you for pointing that out. Yes, the Bathed in Tears, very melodramatic, theatrical, all that we see the Baroque to be. Okay, we will get on to Bolivar next time, the labyrinth, the general in his labyrinth. So please read that over the weekend. If you haven't started already, we will have a quiz on Tuesday. Bye.